Offspring of Incest, what's your story and how is your life? My old neighbor was the product of a father raping his daughter. She had some cognitive impairment that seemed like early onset dementia, but was very slow to progress. Diabetes and tons of mental health issues. Hoarding. Schizophrenia. Agoraphobia. Just about everything imaginable. If it was a thing back then. She would have also been on the autism spectrum. She had 2 children herself, non-incest, that were profoundly mentally ill and also somewhat intellectually disabled. The son was a horribly abusive paranoid schizophrenic and the daughter was a hoarder. They were all living together off of disability. Police raided their home and found they were living in filth with the dead rotting bodies of their pets everywhere. And the entire building was condemned by the health department. The son and daughter, adults in their 50s, wandered off never to be found. Their mother became homeless and ended up in a state-run nursing home. We were her only visitors. My parents are first cousins. I only got some hormonal problems but it's not too serious. It's really embarrassing. The younger ones in my family don't know it and neither do any of my friends. It would be horrible if they knew. A girl in my school once joked about my parents being cousins because I'm Middle Eastern and I nearly got a heart attack but I just laughed it off since I knew it was just a joke. Is your family tree more of a telephone pole? My brother is my father. It's f***ed up. My mother groomed him from a young age to be her perfect lover and they had me when he was 17 and she was 35. I grew up thinking he was my brother and that my dad had left the family. But I found out the truth when I walked in on my brother and mother having sex when I turned 14. I was absolutely horrified and I confronted them and they told me the truth. I felt betrayed and disgusted so that night I took my belongings and left home. Haven't spoken to them since. They were the only family I had since my mother also left her family and never spoke to them again at a young age. I'm 24 now. I have some acquaintances, 2 Indian sisters, adopted by an American family when they were babies. Apparently they were the product of their uncle raping their mother. These girls grew up to be gorgeous geniuses. So it worked out okay for them. I am not offspring but was a teaching assistant at a private school for children that were either the public school system kicked out or could not handle. I'll never forget this girl. Her grandpa was her father. She was 19 or 20 and had to wear diapers all of the time. She suffered from severe autism and was the absolute sweetest girl. This was a couple of years ago but if I remember correctly she was doing schoolwork at about a 2nd to 3rd grade level. The last day of school. Her, and almost all of the kids, were so sad and did not want to leave for summer as we were pretty much the only steady constant figures they had. I actually ended up seeing her while I was walking home from work about a year after the school closed. She still remembered my name and gave me a big hug. I'll never forget it. My parents are first cousins. They share the same grandfather. It's not weird at all in my family. It's talked about openly for as long as I can remember. I remember hearing stories about my mom and dad growing up a couple streets away from each other. My brother and I are not affected at all by them being first cousins. Just a divorce. Alcohol and drug abuse growing up. Men. Not me but a kid in school that I work sub at occasionally. His mother is the direct product of incest. Her father raped his daughter. And he is an absolute delight. Let me tell you. He spends most of his time in a special ed classroom with 3 or 4 other students. And he is always helping out his classmates and his teachers when he can. He saw me at a local event and wanted to introduce me to his mother. She's got no teeth. And just looks ragged and worn. But she is one of the sweetest people I've ever talked to. He'll be alright. I think he's being groomed to be a custodian or something. But it's nice to know that such horrible conditions don't have to define an individual. I have 2 siblings-in-law, adopted. Obviously, who are the product of incest. Both have mental deficiencies. One is in legal trouble relating to child PRN. The other has Prader-Willi syndrome. Meaning they will eat anything and a huge amount. Due to never ever feeling full. Neither will ever live completely independently. A question asking about incest. With no serious tag. Getting really good replies. Did Reddit just make history? My mama is from a tiny town in the deep south. But contrary to popular belief, there was very little actual incest inbreeding going on, and trust me, I would know if there were. My relatives are vicious gossips. A couple of first cousin marriages, but even that was very rare. It used to be more common among upper class southerners. Think Ashley and Melanie from Gone with the Wind, but my mother's family are all dirt poor sharecroppers. There was no wealth to keep within the family. There is, however, one bizarre couple from my mother's hometown. A guy married his stepmother. Now, this would be merely questionable if she had, say, married his dad when he was 18 or older and a more or less independent adult. But no, she married his dad when he was like 8 or 9. Then like 10 years later his dad dies. And the stepson marries his stepmom. Then they had a couple of kids together. I always wondered what the dynamic was like in that family. Dad, mom is being so unfair. I know. She was like that to me when I was your age. My great-grandmother married her uncle. My grandma is an odd one. She would probably have been diagnosed with developmental disabilities had that been a thing in the 1930s. Hard to say if that's a result of the incest though. My great-uncle, grandma's brother, is normal and fine. My paternal great-grandparents were possibly second cousins. Which is not that extreme. Especially for early 20th century rural Tennessee. However, I found some amusing relationships through genealogy research. There was a huge amount of genealogy research done about my section of Tennessee. And I downloaded thousands of people into a program called Family Tree Maker. One feature of the program was that you could click on the names of 2 individuals. And it would tell you how they were related. I found it amusing that there were some people whose name I could click. And I was related to them 4 or 5 different ways. You were my second cousin and my half-third cousin once removed and my third cousin once removed and my double fifth cousin. So many family groups had married into each other over the course of a century in the same area. To be honest, I didn't consider myself a product of incest until I read the comments here. My parents are first cousins. I come from a country where that's normal and lived all my life in another country where it is the norm. I think I'm pretty normal and my siblings too. We all ended up being atheists in a country where you can get killed for that. Smart and open-minded. So in the eyes of my culture there's probably something wrong with us. When I was in the army, I knew a guy whose mother and father were first cousins. Dude was even from West Virginia and had a thick hillbilly accent. Everyone would call him inbred. But it never seemed to bother him. And he'd tell stories about F-king his cousins. But not his sister because she was too fat. I don't know how true it was. But he claimed his aunt had him up against a wall, grinding her butt into his dick until he came. Weird guy. Please put a serious tag. I teach at a school where cousin marriage is a cultural norm. 1 or 2 generations and no real issues present. 5-6 generations and suddenly every second kid has some sort of terrible physical or mental handicap. Also, certain families have a disproportionately large number of students with intellectual disabilities. These families' family trees are Poles. Whoa, no need to drag Poland into this. My parents were step-siblings. They were raised together from young teenagers. But didn't have me until my mom was 28, I think. Anyway, my father robbed a convenience store while my mother was pregnant and was in jail for 4 years. He got out and they got back together. He did a bunch of heroin 6 months later and me and my mom found him dead. 6 months after that my mother dropped me off with some of her junkie friends and never came back. They left me at a church and eventually the police found me. My mother was found dead in her car from an overdose the next day. My grandmother swears she was murdered by the mob for threatening to inform on them about my father's death. I really have no idea. But I think it's her coping strategy. I was raised by my mother's mom and father's dad. And they were extremely normal college-educated people. I've got a host of the mental issues my parents did, but I keep putting one foot in front of the other. Telling the story of my parents just sounds like it happened to somebody else now. My sister-in-law is a French teacher in an area of Ontario that recently received a large influx of Muslim families. In Ontario, students learn French in elementary school. My sister-in-law was teaching her class elementary school French for aunt, uncle, cousin etc, and about half the class put up their hands. All recent immigrants. They wanted to know what word to use when your one parent is also the cousin of your other parent. They don't teach them those words anymore. I may be able to provide you with some insight. Back in the 80s, I spent a lot of time with a strange guy who lived on my block. He was a bit eccentric and had no family or friends that I knew of. As we got to know each other, he became a bit of a mentor to me, sharing details of a few of the strange projects he would be working on. Long story short, me and him traveled back in time, where I accidentally banged my mom and impregnated her with myself. Before this happened, I had always wondered why my dad and I looked so much alike. My life turned out fine. I got my dream truck and got together with my dream girl. So I really have no complaints. Well, not really the same thing, but worth mentioning. My mom and dad aren't genetically related, but were kinda childhood friends who eventually got married. When they were both teenagers, their pairs of parents each split up, and my mom's mom married my dad's dad. So I don't really have a traditional two sides of the family, but a weird tangle of marriage and divorce, and it's kinda hard to keep track of who is related to who by blood. Also, my parents only got married because they got pregnant with me. So I joke with them about how I am an incest-born bastard child. At least my parents and I have a sense of humor about it, but everyone else seems to ignore it entirely. Well, you see, it all started when my dad broke both his arms. Not so great, actually. My father, who suffered from severe mental illness, died before I was born. My mother died in childbirth, so I was mostly cared for when I was young by my older brother, who seems to have inherited whatever mental problem our father had. We traveled around a lot when we were kids, from city to city, never staying very long. We were even across the sea from home most of the time. My brother was abused, physically, sexually and mentally. Never had any real friends or family who weren't awful. My brother made me marry some guy we didn't even know, whose language we don't even speak, just because he had some money. He arped me every night for years. My brother got mixed up in some shady anti-government stuff and died. And then my husband went into a coma the same day our son was stillborn. It's gotten a little better recently, though. Just a year or so since that day. And now I've got 3 healthy children, a better personal life, and I'm the ruler of a small city-state. Soon, the Targaryens will return to Westeros. Probably should have put a serious tag on this. Or not. Roll Tide. Because this wasn't serious, I was expecting a long story about Antigone. I think perhaps you overestimate the breadth of education of the average Reddit user. It's actually wonderful. My father and mother are father, daughter, but they are married to other people. My only genetic disorder is a rare case of synesthesia. I can see sound in color. It's only annoying in the dark when I'm trying to sleep because I see colors around me where the sound is coming from. I can even see my cat in complete darkness. I'm thinking about just adopting a child for fear of passing on my disorder. When OP forgot the serious tag. Do they have internet in West Virginia? JK, I've never been. Born and raised in WV. Oddly enough, any child of incest I knew was from Ohio. Uncle married his ex-wife's sister though. We have internet but it sucks LMAO. I'm not wearing shoes and my teeth are fked up. How do you think we ended up with the Donald?